Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel, and Happy New Year as the first video I'm recording in the new year. My other New Year video, obviously because it was coming out on the day of New Year, had to be recorded before. Anyway, this is Boring Preamble. Hi, I hope you're all doing really well and I hope you all had a really good New Year's. Here's the first week back of reading, and yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the books that I've been reading this week, with the caveat that I've not really done much reading since it turned 2025. So a few of these are books that I read just before the end of the year. And then one of these is a book that I'm just about to finish as well. But anyway, all of that's preamble. Let's get started talking about these books. So first up, this very beautiful set of books. And these are almost more like pamphlets. They are these short books, probably about 30, 40 pages each, that are stories from Taiwanese authors translated into English, and these are published by Strangers Press and based in Norwich in the UK. And I just really enjoy this. I bought it on a bit of a whim for myself as a little Christmas gift to myself, and really enjoyed reading these over the break. These are particularly beautiful and interesting stories because they are these weird and wonderful bits of writing that almost feel sort of sci-fi or fantasy or what have you, but also deal with a very material reality of Taiwan. And so they are just these really fascinating books that I really didn't know what to expect from, with just these weird and wild things happening all throughout. So instead of doing reviews of all 5, because that might take forever, I think these are well worth checking out. I'll put the individual names and a link to them below. But these are just, yeah, I really enjoyed what this had to do, and particularly over the winter period and over Christmas and New Year's, my brain wasn't fully in it, and so having a short, sharp piece of writing to read was fantastic. But these are such intelligent and probing and fun pieces of writing, particularly dealing with the idea of either apocalyptic futures or alternative versions of reality and all these other things. It's fascinating, and I think if nothing else, these covers are just absolutely stunning, and there we go. And I really enjoyed having a chance to read them. Also, quick note just to say, there's just a lot of books and everything everywhere. I've come back from New Year's and I've just got stuff all over this room, and so I'm slowly tidying through, but there are books leaking out of every single place that they could be in the room, and so yeah, that's there. Anyway, the other book I wanted to talk about that is one that I'm currently reading, and that is Croydonopolis by Will Noble. I am a born and raised Croydonian, and I was going to say brave and proud Croydonian. That is not the case in some ways, and I think this is what the book delves into. And the fun of this book is essentially taking a much maligned area like Croydon, which gets bad press. There's a quote in here from David Bowie where he talks about it being an insult that he uses for things, to sort of say that's so Croydon when he doesn't like something. And I thought I'd check this out because it's kind of a local fun book. I mean, I realise this is very niche because people outside of Croydon are probably not that interested in it, but actually I think it works for even if you didn't know Croydon itself, because what this book does is essentially takes the idea of a place that's much maligned and looks at the history of it, looks at various other factors that go into it, and in many ways becomes more of a commentary on the wider UK picture, what UK history has looked like, what London history has looked like, and how that shaped Croydon. And it's also very funny and very witty and silly and absurd along the way as well. So I've been really greatly enjoying this, and I'm close to finishing, and we'll just wrap it up. But yeah, it's fun to read a book that really reflects where I'm from, and a place that I often insult as well. And this book in many ways is an argument not to insult it and to see something else beyond that. So this is quite fittingly my first book of the year. And I really enjoy that the first book of the year is about a place that I have spent much of my adult life trying to avoid. And so, yeah, it feels quite fitting, and I've really greatly enjoyed this. Next up, I read Space Invaders by Nona Fernandez, and translated by Natasha Wimmer. And this is such an interesting book in many, many ways. It is incredibly short, as you can see. It's about 80 or so pages, and even then you've got lots of blank pages or pages with very little text on them. So this is a really quick read, but a book that I really greatly enjoyed. It's a book that deals a lot with Chilean politics, a set of politics I don't know a great deal about, but it does so in a really fascinating way, because It does something that I think is always quite special, where you take the innocence of a child and you play the political events through their eyes. And I know it's a kind of an overdone trope in some ways, but I think this book is particularly successful at doing that, because we see the small incremental changes that go on around the young girl at the heart of this book. But we also start to see how the brutality rubs up against that innocence and both robs people of that ability to feel that they can be neutral or that they can opt out of politics that are happening around them, but equally that it serves as this other way for almost highlighting how brutal the world is. It doesn't need to be this way. People were living some form of relatively peaceful life. And I think the book really cleverly engages with those, and was just such a fantastic read right at the end of the year. Like I mentioned, my reading focus was next to zero. So having any book that was short and sharp and sweet like this, I think did wonders for me in terms of being able to really sharply focus on something. And this book does that clever thing that many shorter books do, which is it lingers over something and then moves along. And in many ways, that means that has more of an impact than showing you every single thing that happened. There's something about the silences of this book that are utterly heartbreaking, because it throws something at you that you know is going to have a big impact later in the plot or later in politics or in whatever else. And just lets you imagine the horrors of what that looks like instead of showing it to you. And in some ways that's worse. The book burrows away underneath your flesh, and I thought it was just really clever and really profoundly done. And last but not least, I listened to the audiobook of Aliss at the Fire by Fosse and translated by Damion Searls. And this book I found really deeply engaging in many ways. I greatly enjoyed his septology, and I know that Fosse is not for everybody. He has a very floaty lyrical style where things happen. There's a lot of rhythm building and repetition. So in this book, for example, there's a constant repetition of people saying or thinking things. So she thinks he's not too bad, she thinks. And when she does this, she thinks this, she thinks, and then this, and blah, blah, blah. And this constant rhythm of thinking or of saying at first seems like it would be a nightmare. And in septology, I think it does it more with these looping sentences and calls to God and various other things. In this book, the thinking and the saying becomes this rhythm and this pattern that in many ways mirrors this tricky inner monologue of these characters. And I found it so utterly captivating. For such a short book, it's amazing how it manages to pull off that rhythm, because I would imagine a significant proportion of this book is just the word said or thinks, or thought or something like that. And somehow the book feels like it contains so much more of this relationship between various characters like Signe and Osla. And they are just these really fascinating characters who are dealing with generational, maybe not necessarily trauma, but the history repeating. There's a sense of looking back to who you used to be and who you are now, and how there are echoes of that. And in many ways, that's why I think the writing style of this really works for me, because it feels like a recurring cycle. The language, the form and function marry together, because the story is propelling you forward through repetition, through constantly looking back and coming back and repeating the cycle, and the history of the characters does much the same. And it builds, I think it's a really good book to do as an audiobook for that reason. I'd imagine the physical reading experience is much the same, but there's something about hearing it as well that was really fun to hear what's happening with those she thinks, and the way it builds almost to absurdity at times, where it becomes almost unnatural in how it's written as this one giant sentence almost. I think there are paragraphs, but it feels like the sentences continuously run on or very quickly jump to the next. And I found the writing style of it really profound. I think this is beautiful. Almost every book I read of Fosse further strengthens for me why he won the Nobel, I think, and why he's such a beloved author. There's something really magical and hypnotic about the quality of his writing, particularly because of the stylistic touches and flourishes that he adds, that really make these meditative books about loneliness and silence and history and generational lives and all these other things come to fruition in this really beautiful, beautiful way. So those are some of the books I read over the winter period. I say winter period, we're still in winter, but over the Christmas and New Year's period. Like I said, have not read a great deal since New Year's, but I'm slowly getting there, and I'm easing back into remembering how to do it, and really loving it as well. So thank you. And particularly people were really lovely about both the New Year's video and my resolutions for the reading year, and about wintering. And a big part of that has just been really slowing it down and thinking, if my brain is really not going with me for reading today, maybe that's not going to happen, or maybe it's an audiobook or a podcast or something instead, but we're just going to take it slowly. And I hope the beginning of 2025 has been that for you as well. Yeah, I hope you're having a great time. Speak to you all very soon, and have a wonderful reading year. Bye-bye.